Hello, Primary 2. How are you? Today I will talk about the clock, which means telling the time. Okay, clock. We have two hands, the long hand for minutes and the short hand for the hours. So, repeat after me again. We have two hands, the long hand for the minutes and the short hand for the hours. Okay. We have a note here. When the long hand points to 12, this is called a clock. When the long hand points to 12, this is called a clock. What is the time here? The short hand on 5 and the long hand on 12. So it's 5 o'clock. Okay. Here, draw the time shown on each clock. The first example here, the short hand on 3 and the long hand on 12. So it's 3 o'clock. Okay, and second example here, the short hand on 6 and the long hand on 12. So it's 6 o'clock. Okay, here write the time in digital form. The first one, the short hand on 10 and the long hand on 12. So it's 10 o'clock. The second one here, the short hand on 5 and the long hand on 12. So it's 5 o'clock. Okay. The third one here, the short hand on what? On 6, super primary 2, and long hand on 12, so it's 6 o'clock. And the last one here, the short hand on 12 and the long hand on 12. So what is the time here? 12 o'clock. Excellent, primary 2. And here we have two parts in the day. The day is 24 hours. The first part is AM at morning. So it's morning. We have 12 hours from 12 midnight to 12 noon. And the second part here is PM, is from 12 noon to 12 midnight. Okay. And here is lesson 57, types of clock. We have two types of clock, analog clock and digital clock. Analog clock here, short hand for the hours and long hand for the minutes. Repeat after me again, short hand for the hours and long hand for the minutes. Okay, but in digital clock, we have two sides, left side and right side. Left side for the hours and right side for the minutes. Left side for the hours and right side for the minutes. Okay. What is the time here? The first one is the short hand on 2 and the long hand on 12, so it's 2 o'clock. The second one here, the short hand on 5 and the long hand on 12, so it's 5 o'clock. Okay, the third example here, the short hand on 9 and the long hand on 12, so it's 9 o'clock. The fourth one here, the short hand on what? On what, primary 2? On 11, primary 2, super. Okay, and the short hand on 12, so it's 11 o'clock. The fifth one here, the short hand on 3 and the long hand on 12, it's 3 o'clock. The last one, the short hand on 6 and the long hand on 12, so it's 6 o'clock. Okay, super primary 2. Lesson 58, telling time to hour and half hour. Here we have two notes. The lines from 1 to 12 represent hours, while the lines between hours represent minutes. Okay, the second note here, there are 5 minutes between each two numbers. In the hour, we have 60 minutes. There are 60 minutes in hour. The long hand on 12 and the short hand at any other number. That is the hour. It's called a clock. It's called a clock. Okay. But in half hour, we have 30 minutes in half hour. We have 30 minutes in half hour. The long hand on 6 and the short hand between any two numbers. The smaller number is the hour. It's called half past hour. Half past hour. Okay. What is the time here? The first example here, the short hand between 1 and 2, the smaller number is the clock, is 1, and the long hand on 6. So, half past 1. The second one here, the short hand on 8 and the long hand on 12. So, it's 8 o'clock. And the third one here, the short hand between 8 and 9, and 8 or smaller number is that o'clock. And the long hand on 6, it's 8 and half past 8. Okay, the fourth one here, the short hand on 7 and the long hand on 12. So it's called 7 o'clock. The fifth one here, the short hand between 11 and 12, so the clock is 11, and the short and the long hand on 6, it's half past 11. And the last one here, the short hand on 2 and the long hand on 12, so it's 2 o'clock. Okay. Lesson 59, time in hours and minutes. The hands of the clock are moving from the right to the left in a circular way. Minutes hands moves every 5 minutes and the hand hour moves every 60 minutes. Repeat after me again. Minutes hands moves every 5 minutes and the hand hour moves every 60 minutes. Okay. The last lesson we have, lesson 60, quarter past and quarter to. There are 15 minutes in quarter past when the long hand on 3 and the short hand is at the hour, it's a quarter past. It's a quarter past when the long hand on 3 and the short hand is at the hour. It's called quarter past. Okay. And here, there are 45 minutes in quarter to. There are 45 minutes in quarter to. When the long hand at 9 and the short hand is at the hour, it's called quarter to. It's called quarter to. Okay. Quarter past and quarter to. The first example here, the short hand on 7 and the long hand on 9. It's called quarter to 7 in analog clock. In digital clock, it's 6:45. Okay. The second example here, the short hand on 8 and the long hand on 3. It's called quarter past 8. In analog clock, in digital clock, it's 8:15. Okay. Write the correct analog time. The first example here, the short hand on 4 and the long hand on 9. It's called quarter to 4. The second here, the short hand on 5 and the long hand on 9. It's a quarter to 5. Okay, and the third one here, the short hand on 9 and the long hand on 3. It's a quarter past 9. The fourth here, the short hand on 2 and the long hand on 9. It's a quarter to 2. The fifth one, the short hand on 1 and the long hand on 3. It's a quarter past 1. The sixth one here is the short hand on 5 and the long hand on 3. It's a quarter past 5. Okay, number 7 here, the short hand on what? On number 9. Okay, and the long hand on what? It's also 9. Bravo, primary 2. It's a quarter to 9. Okay, number 8 here, the short hand on 7 and the long hand on 3. It's called quarter past 7. And the last one here, the short hand on 12 and the long hand on 9. What is this called? Quarter to 12. Super primary 2. Okay. Now we have finished our lesson, and thank you very much for listening. I love you, primary 2.